On Christmas Eve, a young boy wrote a letter to Santa Claus, but when a millionaire read his request, he couldn't hold back his tears. The aroma of cinnamon and apples filled the small apartment, yet not even the comforting scent of Lucas's favorite apple pie could mask the tension in the air. Sophie, 35, stirred the batter with excessive force, trying to hold back the tears threatening to fall. Lucas, only 10 years old, watched his mother from the kitchen table, his brown eyes attentive, taking in every tense movement. He knew something was wrong, very wrong. "Mom," he called hesitantly. "Are you okay?" Sophie froze for a moment, then forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Of course, come, sweetheart. I'm just a little tired." But Lucas knew his mother. He knew every worried crease, every forced smile. And he knew this wasn't just tiredness. "Is it about work?" he asked, his voice small but determined. Sophie's sigh sounded like a balloon deflating. She put down the spoon, turned and faced her son, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Lucas, I lost my job today." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. But Christmas is next week," he exclaimed, his young mind struggling to process the information. Sophie knelt in front of her son, holding his small hands in hers. "I know, my love. We'll figure something out, okay? We always do." But for the first time, Lucas did not believe his mother's words. He saw the fear in her eyes, the tremor in her hands. That night, lying in his bed, Lucas couldn't sleep. Through the crack in the door, he heard Sophie's muffled sobs in the living room. His heart ached. His mother, always so strong, was breaking, and he felt powerless. Then he had an idea. Silently, Lucas got up and went to his desk. By the dim light of his lamp, he began to write, his tongue poking between his teeth in concentration. "Dear Santa Claus, I know I usually ask for toys, but this year is different. My mom lost her job and she's very sad. She always takes care of me, bakes the best apple pie in the world, and hugs me when I'm scared. Please, Santa Claus, all I want for Christmas is a job for my mom. She deserves to be happy. I promise to be the best boy in the whole world if you can make this happen. With hope, Lucas." He reread the letter several times, making sure every word was right. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope. The next morning, while Sophie still slept, exhausted after a night of crying, Lucas slipped out quietly. The winter cold bit at his face, but he didn't care. Determined as cement, he walked to the mailbox at the corner. He stood on tiptoe, reaching the slot. For a moment, he hesitated. What if it didn't work? What if Santa Claus couldn't help? But then he remembered his mother's tired face, the tears she tried to hide. With a trembling sigh, Lucas pushed the letter through the opening. The metallic sound of the letter falling echoed in his ears like a promise of hope, of a miracle. "Please," he whispered to the cloudy sky, "please let this work." He hurried back home, his heart pounding with expectation and secrecy. Upon entering, he found Sophie in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, my love," she smiled, and Lucas noticed that despite her puffy eyes, there was a glimmer of determination in them. "How about pancakes today?" Lucas hugged his mother tightly, feeling the warmth and love emanating from her. "I love you, Mom," he murmured against her apron. Sophie kissed the top of his head, surprised by the intensity of the hug. "I love you too, my little one." As he helped his mother with breakfast, Lucas couldn't help glancing out the window, imagining his letter traveling to the North Pole. In his heart, a spark of hope had been lit. Maybe, just maybe, this year's Christmas would bring more than just presents under the tree. Maybe it would bring a miracle. And so, with the smell of pancakes in the air and the sound of his mother's laughter filling the kitchen, Lucas began counting down the days until Christmas, each moment filled with childish faith and expectation. Little did he know that his small letter was about to set off a chain of events that would change not only his and Sophie's life, but also that of a stranger who never imagined they existed. Marc Dubois watched the city through the panoramic window of his top-floor office. The Christmas lights twinkled below, creating a shimmering carpet stretching as far as the eye could see. It should have been a breathtaking view, but for Marc, It was just a reminder of his loneliness. At 45 years old, Mark had everything money could buy. His tech company was worth billions, and his name was synonymous with success. But on this Christmas Eve, all of it felt empty. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his assistant, Anne. "Mr. Dubois, I'm calling to remind you about the charity event tonight." Mark sighed. He had almost forgotten. "Thank you, Anne. I'll be there." He hung up and straightened his tie in the window's reflection. For a moment, he saw not the successful businessman, but the 12-year-old boy who spent his first Christmas alone in an orphanage. He shook his head, pushing the memory away. An hour later, Mark parked his luxury car in front of a modest building. The faded sign read, "Star of Hope Community Center." Upon entering, he was greeted by Marie, the center's director, an older woman with gray hair and a warm smile. "Mr. Dubois, I'm so glad you could make it." "The children are so excited," Mark forced a smile. "It's a pleasure to be here, Marie." As they walked through the halls decorated with handmade ornaments, Marie explained the night's activities. "We have a tradition here. The children write letters to Santa Claus, and volunteers read them aloud. Then we try to fulfill some of their wishes." Mark nodded distractedly, his gaze caught by colorful drawings on the walls. Children holding hands, Christmas trees, smiling families, images of a world he had never truly known. "Mr. Dubois?" Marie's voice brought him back. "Would you like to read some letters?" He hesitated. The idea of exposing himself emotionally made him uncomfortable, but something in Marie's hopeful look made him give in. Sure, why not? Soon, Mark found himself sitting in a large red chair, surrounded by eager children. He picked up the first envelope from the pile in his lap, feeling strangely nervous. The first letters were typical: requests for toys, video games, bicycles. Mark read them mechanically, his smile not reaching his eyes. Then he got to Lucas's letter. "Dear Santa Claus," Mark began, his voice firm. But as he read, something changed. His voice started to falter. "My mom lost her job and she's very sad. She always takes care of me, bakes the best apple pie in the world and hugs me when I'm scared." Mark felt a lump forming in his throat. Images of his own childhood flooded his mind. Lonely nights, Christmases with no presents, the desperate longing for a mother's hug. "Please, Santa Claus, all I want for Christmas is a job for my mom. She deserves to be happy." The words blurred. Mark blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. The silence in the room was palpable, every child and adult absorbed by the emotion in his voice. "I promise to be the best boy in the whole world if you can make this happen." The last sentence was almost a whisper. Mark lowered the letter, his hand trembling slightly. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then a little girl in the front row asked softly, "Mr. Santa Claus, are you going to help Lucas's mom?" The innocent question hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He looked at the hopeful faces around him, feeling the weight of their expectations. He began, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Santa Claus always does his best to help those in need." The children smiled, satisfied with the answer, but Mark barely noticed them. His mind kept returning to Lucas and his mother. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Mark read a few more letters, handed out presents, smiled for pictures, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lucas and his mom. When he finally said goodbye to Marie and the children, it was already past midnight. The cold night air hit him as he left, but he hardly felt it. Sitting in his car, Mark held Lucas's letter, rereading it by the dashboard light. "She deserves to be happy." The words echoed in his mind. How many times as a child had he wished the same for himself? How many letters had he written, begging for a family, for love, for a place to call home? Mark closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years and missed opportunities. But he also felt something else, a spark of purpose, a chance to make a difference. With a determination he hadn't felt in years, Mark picked up his phone. "Anne, sorry for calling so late. I need you to do something first thing in the morning. Find everything you can about a boy named Lucas and his unemployed mother." The letter came through the local mail, so they must be in the city. He hung up, his heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and hope. For the first time in a long time, Mark did not feel alone. He had a purpose, a mission. Looking at the sleeping city, Mark made a silent promise, not just to Lucas and his mother, but to the lonely boy he once was. "I will make this right," he whispered to the night. "Somehow, I will make this right." With that promise, Mark started the car, leaving the community center behind, but carrying a new determination and perhaps the beginning of his own healing. Mark's office was immersed in tense silence the next morning. He had barely slept, his mind filled with plans and possibilities. Lucas's letter, now carefully stored in his drawer, felt as heavy as a ton of bricks. Anne entered, her usual efficiency slightly shaken by the unusual urgency of Mark's request. "Good morning, Mr. Dubois. I have some preliminary information about the case you asked about." Mark straightened in his chair, anxious. "What did you find out?" "Well, it wasn't easy. There are several families in the area that fit the description. Single mothers, children around age 10. But I've narrowed it down to 3 possibilities." Mark frowned. 3 was better than nothing, but still not enough. "We need more, Anne. Use all the resources we have." Anne hesitated. "Sir, this may involve some unconventional methods of obtaining information." "Do what it takes," Mark said, his voice firm. "Within legal limits, of course." As Anne left to continue the search, Mark leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. His determination to help Lucas and his mother consumed him. But why? Why had this particular letter affected him so deeply? The answer came in the form of a long-buried memory. Mark, at 11 years old, sitting on a narrow bed in the orphanage. It was Christmas Eve, and while the other children exchanged modest gifts, he was alone. In his hands, a crumpled piece of paper, a letter he never sent. "Dear Santa Claus, I know I'm too old to believe in you, but I have no one else to ask. Please give me a family, someone who loves me. I promise to be the best son in the world." Silent tears fell on the words written in childish handwriting. That night, Mark swore he would never again be so vulnerable, so hopeful. He would never again believe in fairy tales or Christmas miracles. The sound of his phone brought him back to the present. It was Anne again. "Mr. Dubois, I think we've found them. Sophie Moreau, 35 years old, single mother of Lucas, 10 years old. She lost her job last week at an accounting firm that suddenly closed." Mark's heart raced. "Address?" Anne hesitated. "Sir, perhaps we should discuss the best approach before—" "The address!" "Anne," Mark interrupted, his voice a mix of anxiety and authority. Reluctantly, she provided the information. Mark jotted it down quickly, thanked her, and hung up. Now that he had the address, Mark found himself paralyzed. What would he do next? Show up at their door? Send a letter? How would he explain his knowledge of their situation without appearing intrusive, or worse, frightening? Again, memories invaded his mind. Mark, at 15, working his first part-time job. His meager salary went almost entirely into a shoebox hidden under his bed at the orphanage. "One day," he promised himself every night, "one day I'll have enough to leave this place, to have a life of my own." The promise of independence kept him going, day after day, year after year. Back in the present, Mark stood up abruptly. He couldn't simply give Sophie money. That wouldn't solve the long-term problem, and more importantly, it wouldn't give her the dignity and independence she deserved. He needed a better plan, something that offered a lasting solution, not just a temporary fix. With renewed determination, Mark began researching. What were Sophie's skills? What kind of job would suit a single mother? How could he help without being patronizing or condescending? Hours passed as Mark delved deeper. The sun was setting when he finally leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. He had a rough plan now. He would use his contacts to find genuine job opportunities suitable for Sophie's skills. It wouldn't be charity, but a real chance. But there was still a problem. How to approach Sophie without revealing how he got his information. Mark picked up the phone, his fingers hovering over the numbers. It would be so easy to call, to explain everything, to offer immediate help. But something stopped him. He remembered how he felt at the orphanage when well-meaning people brought Christmas presents. Gratitude mixed with shame, the desire for independence battling the desperate need for help. No, he couldn't just appear in Sophie's life as a mysterious savior. He needed to be more subtle, more respectful. Mark put the phone back down, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. He would find a way. He had to. Looking out the window at the darkening city, Mark made a silent promise to Sophie and Lucas, and also to the lonely boy he once was. I will help you, but in the right way. I will give you the chance I never had. With that resolve, Mark returned to his desk, determined to craft a plan that would not only help Sophie and Lucas, but also empower them. The night would be long, but for the first time in years, Mark felt he was doing something truly meaningful. The search had begun, not only to find Sophie and Lucas, but to find a way to make a difference without compromising their dignity. And in that process, perhaps Mark would also find something he had lost long ago, a purpose beyond financial success, a connection to humanity he had so long denied himself. Christmas Eve arrived, bringing with it a thin layer of snow covering the streets like a silent blanket. In Sophie and Lucas's small apartment, the air was scented with cinnamon, and the soft sound of Christmas carols hummed in the background. Sophie was in the kitchen, preparing cookie dough with mechanical motions. Her eyes, tired and slightly red, occasionally drifted to the calendar on the fridge. The large red X marking the 24th seemed to mock her. "Mom, can I check the mailbox again?" Lucas's anxious voice pulled her from her thoughts. Sophie forced a smile. "Honey, you've checked 3 times today. The mailman won't deliver anything else on Christmas Eve." But the hopeful gleam in Lucas's eyes made her relent. "All right, go ahead. But wear your coat." As Lucas dashed outside, Sophie allowed herself a moment of weakness. She leaned against the kitchen counter, breathing deeply to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. How could she provide a decent Christmas for her son with not a penny to her name? The doorbell rang, interrupting her dark thoughts. Opening it, Sophie found Mrs. Martinez, her elderly neighbor, holding a covered dish. "Sophie, dear, I made too much turkey and thought I'd bring some over for you and little Lucas." The kind gesture almost broke Sophie's composure. "Oh, Mrs. Martinez, you shouldn't have—" "Nonsense, it's Christmas. No one should be without a proper meal." Sophie hesitated. Her pride screamed to refuse, to maintain the facade that everything was fine, but the delicious aroma and the thought of Lucas made her accept. "Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. That's very kind of you." After saying goodbye to her neighbor, Sophie placed the dish in the fridge, feeling a mixture of gratitude and shame. That's when she noticed Lucas returning, his expression a mixture of disappointment and determination. "Nothing yet, Mom, but I'm sure tomorrow." Sophie knelt down, hugging him tight. "Oh, my love, sometimes Santa Claus works in mysterious ways. The important thing is that we're together, right?" Lucas nodded against her shoulder, but Sophie could feel his small disappointment. Determined to preserve the Christmas magic for her son, she stood up with a renewed smile. "How about we finish these cookies? Then we can watch a Christmas movie." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Sophie tried her best to maintain a festive air, singing along to carols and laughing at Lucas's silly jokes. But each laugh masked a pang of worry. Each smile hid a heavy heart. When evening fell, another knock on the door surprised Sophie. This time, it was Mr. Thompson, the building manager. "Good evening, Sophie. I heard about your situation. If you need more time for this month's rent, we can work something out." A flush of shame colored Sophie's cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, but we'll manage. Don't worry." Closing the door, Sophie rested her forehead against the cold wood. The kindness of her neighbors was touching, but each offer of help was a painful reminder of her precarious situation. "Mom?" Lucas's voice pulled her back to reality. "Can we leave cookies and milk for Santa Claus?" For a moment, Sophie wanted to say no. She wanted to protect Lucas from the disappointment that would surely come in the morning. But the hopeful look on his face stopped her. "Of course, my love. Let's get everything ready." Together, they set out a plate of freshly baked cookies and a glass of milk. Lucas insisted on writing a small note. "Thank you for everything. Santa Claus, with love, Lucas." After tucking Lucas into bed, Sophie felt the weight of the day crash down on her shoulders. She returned to the living room. gazing at the small Christmas tree in the corner with just a few modest gifts underneath. Her eyes drifted to the plate of cookies and the glass of milk. Lucas's unwavering faith, his pure hope, touched something deep within her. Silent tears began to fall. Sitting on the couch, Sophie allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to really feel. The job loss, the mounting bills, the fear of an uncertain future, all of it hit her like a wave. Yet, in the midst of the emotional storm, a resolution formed. For Lucas, she would find a way. She would overcome this, as she always had. Wiping her tears, Sophie stood and went to the tree. She took out a small wrapped gift she had hidden and placed it under the branches. It wasn't much, just a little toy car she had saved from when Lucas was younger, but it was something. Returning her gaze to the cookies, Sophie had an idea. She took one of them and bit into it, leaving visible teeth marks. She took a sip of the milk, leaving a bit less in the glass. Santa Claus was here, she whispered to herself, a sad smile playing on her lips. Before going to bed, Sophie stopped by Lucas's room. He slept peacefully, a slight smile on his innocent face. She leaned over and kissed his forehead. "Merry Christmas, my little one," she murmured. "Tomorrow will be a better day. I promise." Lying in her own bed, Sophie reflected on the day. Despite the struggles, despite the worries, she felt grateful. Grateful for Lucas's love, for her neighbor's kindness, for the fragile hope that still glowed faintly. And as sleep finally claimed her, one thought remained. Maybe, just maybe, Christmas miracles still existed. Not in the form of expensive gifts or magical solutions, but in small acts of love, in human resilience, and in the hope that refused to die. Christmas might be quiet this year, but it wasn't empty. It was full of love, faith, and the promise of better days to come. Mark's office, normally a sanctuary of order and efficiency, looked like a battlefield. Papers were strewn about, empty coffee cups piled up, and Mark himself, tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, seemed to have aged years in just a few nights. He stared at the computer screen, his eyes red with exhaustion but shining with determination. On the screen, a detailed dossier on Sophie Moreau, her background in accounting, her job history, her skills meticulously listed. "Anne," he called through the intercom, "I need you to get in touch with all our business partners in the financial sector." Discreetly. Seconds later, Anne entered, notepad in hand. "What's the context, sir?" Mark hesitated. How to explain his sudden obsession with helping a stranger without sounding, well, obsessive? "I'm looking for job opportunities for a highly qualified accountant, someone who can start immediately." Anne raised an eyebrow but wisely didn't ask questions. "Understood. Anything specific I should mention?" "Yes. Flexible hours would be ideal. And," Mark paused, recalling Lucas's letter, "an environment that understands the needs of a single mother." As Anne left to fulfill her task, Mark leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. Exhaustion consumed him, but something deeper drove him on. Every time he thought of giving up, he remembered the hopeful image of a young boy writing to Santa. Suddenly, a memory struck him. Mark at 16, sitting before a recruiter in a shabby office. The man looked at his skimpy resume with skepticism. "Look, kid, we don't have anything for someone with no experience." Mark's desperation was palpable. "Please, sir, I learn fast. I'll do anything. I just need a chance." The recruiter sighed, a flicker of compassion in his eyes. "All right, there's a warehouse job that needs a helper. It's not glamorous, but it's a start." That single chance changed everything for Mark. Back in the present, Mark opened his eyes, a new resolve filling him. He would be that recruiter for Sophie, the one who looked beyond the paper and gave her the chance she deserved. Hours passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and virtual meetings. Mark used every contact, every favor he could call in, but he didn't just want a job for Sophie, he wanted the right job. Finally, around midnight, Anne entered the office again. "Mr. Dubois, we have 3 promising possibilities." Mark reviewed the options, his heart racing. All were legitimate positions in reputable companies. All offered flexibility and benefits perfect for a single mother. But how to present these opportunities to Sophie without raising suspicion? How to explain his knowledge of her situation without seeming invasive? Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Every plan felt artificial or potentially frightening. Then, an idea began to form. "Anne," he called, a new energy in his voice. "I need you to create an identity for me, a profile of an independent recruiter." Anne looked at him, confused and concerned. "Sir, I'll introduce myself personally to Sophie Moreau, as a recruiter who heard about her situation through community connections." "Mr. Dubois, with all due respect, this seems risky." Mark stood, pacing back and forth. I know, but it's the only way. I need to see for myself, understand who she is. I need—" He stopped, words catching in his throat. Needed what? To see Sophie's face, to hear her voice. Why had this self-imposed mission become so personal? Anne observed her boss with a mix of worry and understanding. In all her years working for Mark, she'd never seen him so human. "I understand, sir. I'll prepare everything. But may I suggest something?" Mark nodded, grateful for the stability Anne's efficiency always provided. "Perhaps it's better to wait until after Christmas. Give her and her son a day of peace before bringing up the job situation." Mark felt a wave of gratitude for his assistant. Of course, he'd been so focused on helping that he forgot the humanity of the gesture. "You're absolutely right, Anne. Thank you." As Anne left to prepare his new identity, Mark found himself alone with his thoughts. What was he really doing? Was it genuine altruism or a desperate attempt to correct the wrongs of his past? He remembered countless Christmas nights, spent alone, years longing for a family, for someone who cared. And now, here he was, a successful man, but still as lonely as the boy in the orphanage. Maybe, Mark reflected, this wasn't just about helping Sophie and Lucas. Maybe it was about reconnecting with his own humanity, about remembering what really mattered in life. With a deep sigh, Mark made his final decision. He would introduce himself to Sophie as Pierre Dubois, an independent recruiter. He would offer the job opportunities, but also be prepared for any reaction, suspicion, refusal, even anger. Above all, he would be genuine. No manipulation or tricks, just the truth, or as much of it as he could offer without compromising his mission's integrity. Looking out the window at the sleeping city, Mark felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. In a few days, he would come face to face with Sophie Moreau. In that moment, he knew not only her fate would be at stake, but his as well. "Merry Christmas, Sophie and Lucas," he murmured to the starry sky. "I hope I can make a difference in your lives. And maybe you'll make a difference in mine, too." With that thought, Mark finally allowed himself to rest, knowing the coming days would bring challenges, but also the possibility of redemption and a connection he never knew he longed for. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Sophie's apartment, illuminating the modest living room. The remnants of their modest Christmas celebration were scattered about, torn gift wrap, cookie crumbs on the plate left for Santa, and a small Christmas tree lovingly decorated. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between her hands, her eyes scanning the newspaper in front of her. The job section, as always, was marked and circled, but the hope in her gaze dwindled with each ad that didn't fit her qualifications or needs. Lucas, still in his pajamas, entered the kitchen rubbing sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Mum," he mumbled, hugging her waist. Sophie smiled, ruffling her son's messy hair. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Lucas nodded, then his eyes lit up as he remembered something. "Mum, Santa ate the cookies. He came." Sophie's heart clenched a bit. Lucas's innocence and hope were both comforting and painful at once. "Yes, dear. It looks like he really enjoyed your special cookies." As she prepared breakfast for Lucas, Sophie couldn't help thinking about the coming weeks. The money was running out, and the bills kept piling up. The joy of Christmas would soon give way to the harsh reality of January. Just then the phone rang, breaking the silence of the post-Christmas morning. Sophie frowned, confused. Who would call so early the day after Christmas? Hesitantly, she answered, "Hello? Good morning? Am I speaking with Sophie Moreau?" A masculine, professional yet warm voice sounded on the other end. "Yes, this is she," Sophie replied. curiosity mixed with a hint of apprehension. "Great. My name is Pierre Dubois. I'm an independent recruiter. I'm reaching out because I have some job opportunities I believe might interest you, considering your accounting experience." Sophie felt her heart race. A job opportunity. Now, it seemed too good to be true. "I'm sorry, but how did you get my information?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. There was a brief pause before Pierre answered. "I understand your concern, Ms. Moreau. I was informed about your situation by some local business community contacts. They mentioned you're a highly qualified professional who recently found herself in a difficult spot due to your previous company closing suddenly." Sophie felt a mix of emotions: gratitude that someone had thought of her, shame that her situation was apparently known, and a growing hope she struggled to contain. I appreciate your interest, Mr. Dubois, but I must admit I'm surprised. It's not common to receive a call like this, especially the day after Christmas." Pierre chuckled softly. "You're right, it's not conventional, but I believe good opportunities shouldn't wait. I have 3 positions that could be perfect for someone with your skills. Would you like to schedule an interview to discuss the details?" Sophie hesitated. Everything felt so surreal. She looked at Lucas, who now watched her curiously as he ate his cereal. "Mom," he whispered. "Who is it?" Covering the phone, Sophie answered softly, "It's about a job, honey." Lucas's eyes widened, a huge smile spreading across his face. "Santa Claus," he whispered excitedly. "He answered my letter." Lucas's enthusiasm hit Sophie like a wave. She felt tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. Could it be? Could this be the miracle they needed? Turning her attention back to the phone, Sophie took a deep breath. "Mr. Dubois, I would very much appreciate the opportunity for an interview." "Excellent," Pierre's voice sounded genuinely happy. "How about tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I can send you the address via text." "Tomorrow?" Sophie almost choked. Everything was happening so fast. "Unless that's too soon," Pierre added quickly. "We can reschedule if you prefer." Sophie looked again at Lucas, seeing the hope shining in his eyes. No, she couldn't let this chance slip away. "No, tomorrow is fine. I'll be there." After finalizing the details and hanging up, Sophie found herself trembling slightly. It was a mix of nervousness, excitement, and a touch of fear. "Mom?" Lucas's voice brought her back to reality. "What happened?" Sophie knelt beside his chair, holding his small hands. "Well, my love, it looks like I have a job interview tomorrow." Lucas's shout of joy echoed through the apartment. "I knew it. I knew Santa Claus would help. He read my letter." Sophie felt her heart tighten. Part of her wanted to protect Lucas from possible disappointment, to explain that things don't always work out. But another part of her, a part she thought she'd lost, began to believe that maybe, just maybe, miracles could happen. "Let's hope so, sweetheart," she said, hugging him tightly. "Let's hope." They spent the rest of the day in a state of excited anticipation. Sophie reviewed her resume, chose her best outfit, and practiced answers to potential interview questions. Lucas, for his part, wouldn't stop talking about how amazing Santa Claus was and how everything would be fine now. That night, as she tucked Lucas into bed, Sophie was assailed by doubts. What if it was all a scam? What if she was feeding false hopes? "Mom," Lucas's sleepy voice broke into her worries. "Yes, dear. You're going to get the job, I know you will." The unwavering confidence in his voice brought tears to Sophie's eyes. She leaned down, kissing her son's forehead. "Thank you, my love. Now sleep well." Back in the living room, Sophie allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks, tears of hope, fear, and gratitude for having Lucas in her life. Glancing at the phone, where the message with the interview address still glowed on the screen, Sophie made her final decision. No matter the risk or uncertainty, she would go to that interview. She would fight for this chance, not just for herself, but for Lucas. "All right, universe," she whispered to the silent apartment. "I'm ready. Whatever you have planned, I'm ready." With that resolve, Sophie went to sleep, her heart swinging between cautious hope and fierce determination. Tomorrow could change everything, and she was determined to seize every second of this unexpected opportunity. Morning arrived with a blend of mist and sunlight, creating an ethereal glow over the city. Sophie woke before the alarm, her stomach knotted with anxiety and hope. She dressed carefully, choosing her best suit, slightly snug after years without wear, but still elegant. "You look beautiful, Mom," Lucas exclaimed, watching from the bedroom door. Sophie smiled, nervously adjusting her blouse. "Thank you, sweetheart. Remember, Mrs. Martinez will stay with you while I'm gone." Lucas nodded solemnly. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll pray so Santa Claus keeps helping you." With a lump in her throat, Sophie hugged her son. His unwavering faith was both a comfort and a weight. She couldn't fail him. She couldn't let him down. The trip to the address provided was a blur of anxious mental rehearsals. Sophie repeated all her prepared answers to herself, trying to convince herself she was ready. The building where the interview would take place was imposing, all glass and steel. Sophie felt small as she entered the luxurious lobby. Approaching the receptionist, her voice trembled slightly. "Good morning. I'm Sophie Moreau. I have an interview scheduled with Mr. Pierre Dubois." The receptionist gave a friendly smile. "Of course, Ms. Moreau. Please take the elevator on the right, 20th floor." As she ascended, Sophie tried to calm her breathing. The elevator doors opened onto a sleek corridor, and she was greeted by a middle-aged woman with a professional smile. "Ms. Moreau, I'm Anne, Mr. Dubois' assistant. Please follow me." Sophie was led into a conference room overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, but she had no time to admire it before the door opened again. Marc Dubois entered, his presence filling the room immediately. Tall, well-dressed, with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, there was something about him Sophie couldn't decipher. "Miss Moreau, it's a pleasure to meet you," said Marc, extending his hand. "I hope you don't mind that I chose this room. I thought the view might help relieve some interview tension." Sophie shook his hand, noticing the firm grip. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Dubois, and thank you for the consideration." They sat down, and for a moment, an awkward silence hung in the air. Sophie had the impression that Marc was studying her intently, searching for something beyond her resume. "Well," Marc finally broke the silence, "as I mentioned on the phone, I have some opportunities I believe suit your skills. But before we dive into details, I'd love to hear more about you. What led you to accounting?" The question caught Sophie off guard. She expected typical queries about experience and technical skills, but something in Marc's gaze encouraged her to be honest. "Actually, it was my mother who inspired me," Sophie began, her voice gaining confidence. "She was an incredible woman who raised my siblings and me alone. She always said understanding numbers was understanding the world. For me, accounting isn't just about ledgers and reports. It's about telling stories through numbers, understanding the heart of a business." Marc leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "A fascinating perspective. And how have you applied that philosophy in your career so far?" Sophie felt a surge of confidence. This was her ground. She spoke about past projects, how she helped small businesses optimize their finances, the satisfaction of seeing a company thrive thanks to good financial management. As she spoke, Sophie noticed something shift in Marc's gaze. The professional mask seemed to melt a bit, revealing what? Admiration, understanding. "Impressive, Ms. Moreau," Marc said when she finished. "Your passion is evident. Now tell me about your last job. I understand the company closed unexpectedly." Sophie felt a knot in her stomach. This was the part she feared. "Yes, it was. A shock for all of us. One day we were working as usual. The next—" She took a deep breath, determined not to show weakness. "But I'm determined to move forward. Every challenge is an opportunity to grow, right?" Marc observed her for a long moment before replying. "Absolutely. And that resilience is exactly what we're looking for." The interview continued, alternating between technical questions and more personal conversations. Sophie surprised herself by how easily she opened up to Marc. There was something about him, a hidden vulnerability perhaps, that made her feel understood. At one point, when Marc mentioned his own journey in the industry, Sophie had a flash of recognition. There was something familiar in his story, in the way he spoke, but she couldn't pinpoint what. Finally, after what felt like both minutes and hours, Mark placed his hands on the table, his intense gaze fixed on Sophie. "Ms. Moreau, I'll be direct. I was extremely impressed by you today. Your technical expertise is impeccable, but it's your unique perspective and resilience that truly stand out." Sophie's heart raced. She barely dared to breathe. "I have a position to offer you. It's at Novum Finances, a mid-sized financial consulting firm with an excellent reputation. They're looking for someone to lead a new initiative focused on small businesses, the kind of work you said you love." Sophie felt as if the world had stopped. "Could this be real?" Mark continued, his voice gentle but firm. "The salary is competitive, with excellent benefits, including comprehensive health coverage. And," he paused meaningfully, "they offer flexible hours and partial remote work options. I understand that might be important to you." The implications were not lost on Sophie. He knew about Lucas. He knew she was a single mother. Instead of feeling exposed, Sophie felt a wave of gratitude. This man, this stranger, genuinely seemed to care about her well-being. "Mr. Dubois, I don't know what to say," Sophie finally managed, her voice choked with emotion. "This seems too perfect to be true," Mark completed with a compassionate smile. "I understand your hesitation, but I assure you it's a legitimate offer. In fact," he took a folder from his briefcase, "here are all the position details, including a preliminary contract. Take it home, review it, ask questions. I want you to feel completely comfortable before making a decision." Sophie took the folder with trembling hands. It was heavy, solid, a real anchor in a moment that felt like a dream. "Thank you," she whispered, tears threatening to fall. "I don't know how to thank you." Mark stood, his gaze softening. "No need to thank me, Ms. Moreau. You earned this on your own merits. All I did was connect talent to opportunity." As Sophie prepared to leave, still dazed, Mark gently stopped her. "Sophie," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I know the last few months have been hard, but what I saw today was an incredibly strong and capable woman. Your son is lucky to have you as his mother." The words struck Sophie deeply. She looked at Mark, truly looked at him, and for a moment saw beyond the recruiter's facade. She saw a man with his own secrets, his own struggles. In that instant, she felt a connection she couldn't explain. "Thank you, Mr. Dubois, truly." Leaving the building, Sophie felt as if she were floating. The folder in her hands was proof she hadn't dreamed it. A new opportunity, a chance to start over. Looking up at the sky, Sophie whispered a prayer of gratitude. To whom or what, she wasn't sure. Maybe to the universe. Maybe to the Santa Claus Lucas believed in so fervently. With a light heart and determined steps, Sophie headed home. She could hardly wait to see Lucas's face when she told him the news. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. The Novum Finance office buzzed with Monday morning activity. Sophie, in her new suit purchased especially for the occasion, felt a mix of excitement and nerves as she was guided down the hallway to her new office. "Here we are, Ms. Moreau," said Sarah, the HR manager, opening the door. "Your new home away from home?" Sophie stepped in, amazed. The office was spacious, with a large window offering a panoramic city view. A nameplate on the desk read, "Sophie Moreau, Project Manager." "Wow," Sophie whispered, almost not believing it. Sarah smiled. "Mr. Dubois was quite insistent on ensuring you had everything you needed to get off to a great start. He seems to have a lot of faith in you." Sophie felt a slight blush on her cheeks. Since the interview, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about Mark Dubois. There was something about him, something familiar and intriguing. The first weeks flew by in a whirlwind of new responsibilities, meetings and exciting projects. Sophie threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, determined to prove her worth. But as days passed, small details began to catch her attention. One afternoon, while reviewing some files, Sophie noticed something odd. Several of her clients had connections to larger companies, all seemingly linked to a conglomerate called Dubois Enterprises. The name made Sophie frown. Dubois, as in Marc Dubois. Meanwhile, in his office across town, Marc wrestled with his own demons. He had promised himself to keep his distance, to let Sophie shine on her own, but he couldn't help it. Every day, he anxiously awaited reports on her progress. "Anne," he called through the intercom, "any updates on Ms. Moreau?" Anne entered, a hint of disapproval on her face. "Mr. Dubois, with all due respect, don't you think you're getting too involved?" Marc sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. It's just that I need to be sure I did the right thing." Anne's expression softened. "She's doing wonderfully well, sir." "Every report is extremely positive." Marc nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good. That's good." Back at Sophie's apartment, Lucas watched his mother curiously. She seemed happier, more energetic, but also distracted. "Mom," he asked one evening as Sophie checked her emails, "do you like your new job?" Sophie looked at her son, noticing the worry in his eyes. She closed her laptop and pulled him into a hug. "I love it, sweetheart. It's challenging and exciting." "Why do you ask?" Lucas hesitated. "It's just, you always seem to be thinking about something else, like you have a secret." Lucas's words hit Sophie like lightning. She had been so focused on her new job and proving her worth that she hadn't realized how it affected her son. "Oh, Lucas," she whispered, hugging him tighter. "I'm sorry if I've been distant. There are no secrets, I promise. I'm just adjusting to everything." But even as she said those words, Sophie couldn't help thinking about the little inconsistencies she had noticed, the questions forming in her mind. The next week, during a meeting with an important client, Sophie received a surprise. The company's CEO casually mentioned, "We're very pleased with our partnership with Novum. Marc Dubois really knows how to pick exceptional talent." Sophie froze. "Excuse me, but Marc Dubois?" The CEO looked confused. "Yes, the owner of Novum Finance." "I thought you knew." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Sophie's mind spun. Marc Dubois wasn't just a recruiter. He owned the company. He had lied to her. That night, Sophie could hardly sleep. Why had Marc hidden his true identity? Why all this elaborate scheme? The more she thought, the more questions arose. Early the next morning, determined to find the truth, Sophie arrived at the office before anyone else. She began digging through files, connecting dots, searching for any information that might clarify Marc Dubois' mystery. Then she found something that made her heart stop. An old newspaper article, buried in a digital archive. "Orphan Boy Becomes Millionaire, the inspiring story of Marc Dubois." The photo showed a much younger Marc, but unmistakably him. The article detailed his journey from an orphanage to becoming one of the country's most successful businessmen. Sophie felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Everything started to make sense. The connection she felt, the familiarity in his eyes, his unexpected generosity. But why? Why had Marc gone to such lengths? At that moment, as if summoned by her thoughts, the door to Sophie's office opened. Marc Dubois entered, his face worried and guilty. "Sophie," he began, his voice trembling, "I think we need to talk." Sophie stood slowly, the article still in her hands. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the lies and pretenses fell away. "Yes, Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I believe we do." The air between them was heavy with tension, secrets about to be revealed, and the promise of a conversation that would change everything. Sophie knew that after this, nothing would be the same. The trust she'd placed in Marc, the gratitude she felt, all of it was now in question. As she braced herself to hear Marc's explanation, Sophie couldn't help thinking of Lucas, of how she would explain all this to him. The Santa Claus he believed in had become a flesh and blood man, with his own motivations and secrets. The moment of truth had arrived, and Sophie was determined to face it head-on, no matter what came next. Sophie's office, once a symbol of her new beginning, now felt suffocating. She and Marc faced each other, silence hanging between them, heavy with questions unasked and truths untold. Sophie was the first to break the silence, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Who are you really, Mr. Dubois? Or should I say the owner of Novum Finance?" Mark closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. When he opened them again, Sophie saw guilt and determination mingled there. "You're right, Sophie. I haven't been entirely honest with you. I am Mark Dubois, CEO of Dubois Enterprises, which includes Novum Finance." Sophie felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Even though she had discovered part of the truth, hearing it confirmed hurt. "Why?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why all this deception? Why choose me?" Mark took a step forward, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Sophie, please let me explain. It all started with your son's letter." Sophie's eyes widened. "Lucas's letter? How?" "I was doing volunteer work at a charity event on Christmas Eve. I read Lucas's letter asking Santa Claus for a job for you. It touched me deeply." Mark then told Sophie about his own childhood in an orphanage, about how Lucas's letter reminded him of his own unfulfilled Christmas wishes, and how it had stirred something inside him. "I wanted to help, Sophie. But I knew if I approached you as Mark Dubois, the millionaire, you'd likely refuse out of pride or see me as just another rich man trying to buy goodwill. I wanted to give you a fair chance, based solely on your merits." Sophie listened silently, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Part of her understood Mark's intentions, but another part felt deeply betrayed. "You had no right," she finally said, her voice shaking with restrained anger. "You had no right to toy with our lives like that, to make me believe I'd earned this on my own, when in fact it was all part of your charity experiment." Mark looked genuinely hurt by her words. "No, Sophie, you misunderstand. Everything you achieved here was by your own merit. I only opened the door, but you proved your worth every day." Sophie shook her head, tears of frustration threatening to spill. "How can I believe you now? How can I trust anything you say?" Just then, a small noise drew both their attention. The office door was ajar, and there, eyes wide and full of tears, stood Lucas. "Lucas!" Sophie exclaimed, horrified that her son had overheard part of the conversation. "What are you doing here?" Lucas stepped into the room, trembling. I wanted to surprise you. Mrs. Martinez brought me, but now..." He looked from Sophie to Mark, his lower lip trembling. "I ruined everything, didn't I? Because of my letter." Sophie's heart shattered at the sight of her son's devastated expression. She knelt down, pulling him into a tight embrace. "No, my love, you didn't ruin anything." Mark stepped forward cautiously, not wanting to intrude, but unable to hold back. "Lucas, your letter was a gift. You did nothing wrong." Sophie looked at Mark, a mix of emotions in her eyes. Straightening up, she made a decision. "Mr. Dubois, I appreciate everything you've done for us, but I can't continue like this. I can't work or live with this lie hanging over us." Mark looked alarmed. "Sophie, please don't do anything rash. Your job here, your achievements, they're real." But Sophie was resolute. "I'm sorry, but I need time to process all this, to decide what's best for me and Lucas." Taking Lucas's hand, Sophie headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time to Mark. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Dubois, but I think it's best if we go our separate ways now." With that, she left, leaving Mark alone in the office, his expression a mixture of regret and despair. In the elevator, Lucas looked at his mother, tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to help." Sophie knelt down, cupping her son's face in her hands. "Lucas, you did nothing wrong. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and nothing will change that." As they left the building, Sophie felt as if the world was spinning. She had just given up her dream job, an opportunity that could have changed their lives. But the feeling of having been deceived, manipulated, even with good intentions, was too much. That night, lying in her bed, Sophie cried silently. Tears of frustration, anger, but also a strange gratitude. Because despite everything, Mark Dubois had shown her what she was capable of. He had given her a glimpse of a better future. But now, that future seemed distant again. Sophie knew she would have to start over, find a new path. And this time, it would be on her own. without millionaires with good intentions or magical letters to Santa. With a deep sigh, Sophie made a promise to herself and Lucas. They would overcome this together, and whatever future awaited them would be built on truth and mutual trust. The road ahead would be hard, but Sophie was determined to face it head-on with Lucas by her side, because in the end she realized the true Christmas miracle wasn't the job or the opportunity, but the love and strength they shared as a family. The days following Mark's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for Sophie. She oscillated between anger at the manipulation, reluctant gratitude for the opportunity given, and a deep sense of loss. The apartment, once filled with hope for a new start, now felt stifling under the weight of silence and unspoken words. Sophie spent hours sitting at the kitchen table, obsessively reviewing the events of the past months. Every memory, every interaction with Mark, now carried a new meaning. She felt foolish for not having noticed earlier, and that wounded pride fueled her anger. "How could I have been so blind?" she muttered to herself, hands gripping a cup of cold coffee. Yet in moments of clarity, Sophie couldn't deny the positive impact Mark had on their lives. The job, even if obtained through questionable means, had restored her confidence and shown her what she could accomplish. And Lucas had smiled more in the past weeks than he had in months before. That thought led her to look toward her son's bedroom. Lucas had become unusually quiet since the incident at the office. The cheerful, hopeful boy seemed to have vanished, replaced by a more somber, introspective version of himself. Across the city, Mark Dubois faced his own demons. Sitting in his luxurious office, he barely touched the work in front of him. His thoughts were constantly on Sophie and Lucas. "I messed everything up, Anne," he confessed to his assistant, who watched him with a mix of sympathy and exasperation. "I just wanted to help, and I ended up causing more pain." Anne sighed. "Sir, your intentions were good, but sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions." Mark nodded sadly. "I know, but I can't just give up on them. I need to fix this somehow." He picked up his phone several times throughout the days, fingers hovering over Sophie's number, but never pressing call. What could he say? How could he explain that, in his clumsy attempt at doing good, he had grown attached to them in a way he hadn't expected? Back at Sophie's apartment, Lucas lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Guilt consumed him. In his child's mind, this was all his fault. If he hadn't written that letter, if he hadn't wished so hard for a miracle, none of this would have happened. He could hear his mother in the kitchen, the occasional muffled sob reaching his ears. Each tear from Sophie felt like a stab to Lucas's heart. Then an idea began to form in his mind. If he had caused this, then it was his responsibility to fix it. He had to find Mark, explain everything, make him understand that Sophie deserved the job, that she was amazing and talented. With a determination only a 10-year-old could have, Lucas began to plan. He waited until Sophie finally went to bed, exhausted from crying. Then, silently, he packed his backpack, stuffing a few clothes and his piggy bank inside, and wrote a hurried note. "Mom, I went to fix things. Don't worry. I love you. Lucas." With his heart pounding, he slipped out of the apartment. The night was cold and Lucas shivered, pulling his coat tighter. He didn't know exactly where Mark lived, but he remembered the name of the company, Dubois Enterprises. Walking through the dark streets, Lucas felt a mixture of fear and determination. Every shadow seemed threatening, every noise made him jump. But he kept going, guided by his unwavering belief that he could fix what was broken. After hours of walking, exhausted and with sore feet, Lucas finally spotted an imposing building with the Dubois Enterprises logo. His heart leaped. He had made it. Approaching the entrance, he was stopped by a security guard. "Hey, kid, what are you doing here so late?" Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes and he pleaded, "Please, I need to see Mr. Dubois." "It's an emergency." The guard, seeing the boy's state, felt pity. "Look, Mr. Dubois isn't here right now. It's very late. Shouldn't you be home?" Reality hit Lucas hard. He was alone, in the middle of the night, far from home. Fear and exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he began to cry uncontrollably. Alarmed, The guard took Lucas inside the building and called the police. Within minutes, sirens pierced the air. Meanwhile, Sophie awoke with a terrible feeling. Something was wrong. She rushed to Lucas's room, only to find it empty, with his note on the bed. Panic consumed her. Without hesitation, she picked up the phone and, with trembling fingers, dialed the number she had sworn never to use again. Mark's sleepy voice answered. "Hello?" "Mark," Sophie sobbed, all pride forgotten. "Lucas is gone. He ran away. I think he went looking for you." There was a shocked silence on the other end, followed by Mark's urgent voice. "I'm on my way. We'll find him, Sophie. I promise." As Sophie hurried to get dressed, her heart pounding frantically, she realized that, despite everything, Mark was the first person she called in her moment of need. That realization brought a wave of confusing emotions she had no time to process now. In that moment, all that mattered was finding Lucas. The rest, the hurt feelings, the lies, the painful truths would have to wait, because in the end, a mother's love for her child trumped any pain or wounded pride. And so, in the darkness of the night, 3 broken hearts converged, united by their concern for a small boy who only wanted to fix the world around him. Panic coursed through Sophie's veins like ice as she ran through the dark streets, shouting Lucas's name. Every shadow, every alley seemed threatening, hiding her worst fears. Not far behind her, Mark Dubois coordinated a large-scale search operation. His face, usually composed, was marked by worry and guilt. He had mobilized every resource at his disposal. His company's security team, police contacts, even a private search and rescue crew. "I want every inch of this city searched," he ordered over the phone. "Leave no stone unturned. Find him." Meanwhile, the news of Lucas's disappearance spread quickly through the community. Neighbors left their homes, some still in pajamas, holding flashlights and calling the boy's name. Mrs. Martinez, Sophie's elderly neighbor, organized search parties, handing out photos of Lucas from previous Christmases. "He's one of ours," she told every new volunteer. "We're bringing him home." Hours passed, and anxiety grew. Sophie, exhausted and her voice hoarse from calling, found herself in the local park where she used to take Lucas to play. Her legs finally gave way, and she collapsed onto a bench, sobbing uncontrollably. Footsteps approached, and she looked up to see Mark, out of breath and disheveled, a stark contrast to his usual polished image. "Any sign of him?" Sophie asked, a spark of hope in her red-rimmed eyes. Mark shook his head sadly. "Not yet, but we're not giving up. We have teams all over the city." For a moment, they stood together, united in desperation and worry. All the hurts and resentments of the past days seemed insignificant compared to the fear of losing Lucas. "This is all my fault," Sophie whispered, her voice choked with tears. "If I hadn't reacted so drastically to your revelation." Mark knelt before her, taking her trembling hands. "No, Sophie. It's my fault. If I had been honest from the start." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something changed between them. A mutual understanding, a silent forgiveness. Suddenly, a quiet, familiar sound reached Sophie's ears, a muffled sob coming from somewhere close by. She stood abruptly, senses on high alert. "Lucas," she called, her voice trembling with hope and fear. Another sob, slightly louder this time. Sophie and Mark exchanged quick glances before running toward the sound. There, huddled beneath a large oak tree, was Lucas. His face was dirty with tears and dirt, his body shaking with cold and exhaustion. "Lucas!" Sophie shouted, rushing toward her son. The boy looked up, his eyes widening at the sight of his mother and Mark. For a moment, he seemed ready to run again, but then he simply collapsed into sobs. Sophie wrapped him in her arms, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Oh, my love, my baby, you're safe now." Mark approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude but unable to contain his own emotion. Lucas, still sobbing in his mother's arms, looked at Mark with guilt and fear. I only wanted to fix things. I thought if I talked to you, Mr. Dubois, I could make everything right again." Mark knelt down beside them, his voice gentle. "Lucas, you didn't need to fix anything. None of this was your fault. Sophie pulled back slightly, cupping Lucas's face. "Why did you do this, sweetie? You scared us so much." Lucas lowered his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "I heard you crying every night, Mom, and I thought it was all because of my letter to Santa. If I hadn't asked for a job for you, none of this would have happened." Sophie's heart broke at her son's words. She hugged him even tighter, rocking him gently. "Oh, Lucas, my love, you didn't do anything wrong. Your letter was an act of pure, beautiful love." Mark, feeling he should say something, added, "Lucas, your letter reminded me of what's truly important in life. You didn't cause problems. You brought light." Lucas looked from his mother to Mark, confused but hopeful. "So, you're not mad at me?" "Never," Sophie said firmly. "We were worried, scared, but never angry. We love you more than anything." Mark nodded, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "And I'm sorry for making things complicated. All I wanted was to help, but I ended up causing more trouble." Sophie looked at Mark, truly seeing him for the first time in days. She saw the regret in his eyes, the genuine concern, and felt her anger melt away. "Maybe we all made mistakes," she said softly. "But what matters is that we're all here now, safe." Lucas, still trembling slightly, looked between the two adults. "So, everything's going to be okay now." Sophie and Mark exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. "Yes, sweetheart," Sophie answered, stroking Lucas's hair. "We're going to make everything okay." Mark stood, offering a hand to help Sophie and Lucas up. "Let's get you both home. You need rest, and we have a lot to talk about in the morning." As they left the park, Mark made quick calls to inform everyone that Lucas had been found. The news spread fast, and soon the streets were filled with relieved neighbors, some even crying with joy. Mrs. Martinez was the first to reach them, wrapping Lucas in a tight hug. "Oh, thank God! Don't scare us like that again, young man." Lucas, exhausted but safe in his mother's arms, just nodded, mumbling an apology. When they finally arrived at Sophie's apartment, adrenaline began to fade, leaving everyone exhausted. Mark hesitated at the door, unsure if he should enter. Sensing his hesitation, Sophie said gently, "Please, come in. I think we all need a cup of tea and a good conversation." Mark nodded gratefully, following them inside. While Sophie put Lucas to bed, whispering words of comfort and love, Mark waited in the living room, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He knew the next few hours were crucial. There was much to say, much to clarify. When Sophie returned, her eyes were tired, but there was a new determination in them. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything you did tonight." Mark shook his head. "No need to thank me. I care deeply about both of you, Sophie, more than I expected or understood." Sophie sat beside him on the couch, a deep sigh escaping her lips. "I think we all learned some hard lessons in these past weeks." Mark nodded, his voice low and sincere. "I promise you, Sophie, from now on only the truth. No more secrets, no more games. If you'll give me a chance, I'd like to do things the right way this time." Sophie studied him for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, a small smile touched her lips. "I think we all deserve a second chance. But this time, let's build something based on honesty and mutual trust." Mark felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders. "That's all I could ask for." As the night wore on into the early morning, Sophie and Mark talked, truly talked, for the first time. They shared stories, fears, hopes. Gradually, the walls they'd built began to crumble. In the next room, Lucas slept peacefully, exhausted but safe. And in the living room, two adults who had lost themselves in their own good intentions began to find their way back, not just to each other, but to a better version of themselves. As the first rays of morning sun filtered through the window, Sophie and Mark exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but together, with honesty and compassion, they would face whatever came next. The night of fear and searching had turned into a morning of hope and new beginnings. Morning arrived quietly, sunlight streaming through the apartment's curtains. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the palpable tension in the living room. Sophie, Mark, and Lucas were seated in an uncomfortable semicircle. Lucas Yee, still exhausted from the night before, snuggled close to his mother on the couch. Mark sat in an armchair opposite them, his restless hands betraying his nerves. "I think we have a lot to talk about," Sophie began, her voice soft but firm, and this time, without half-truths or omissions. "We all deserve complete honesty." Mark nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right, and I think I should start by apologizing. To both of you." He looked directly at Lucas. "Especially you, Lucas. I never meant to cause so much trouble and worry." Lucas, eyes still red from crying, mumbled, "It's okay, Mr. Dubois. I'm sorry I ran away." Sophie hugged her son tighter. "Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. You acted out of love, even if it scared us." She then turned to Mark. "But you, Mark, I think you owe us a full explanation. Why all the elaborate charade? Why not just offer help directly?" Mark took a deep breath, preparing himself. It was time for the whole truth. "It all began on Christmas Eve," he started, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "I was doing volunteer work, reading letters to Santa Claus at a local charity. It was something I did every year, an attempt to fill a void I've carried since childhood." He paused, gathering courage to continue. "You see, I grew up in an orphanage. I never knew my parents, never had a true home at Christmas." Sophie and Lucas listened attentively, their eyes widening with surprise and compassion. Mark's voice grew steadier. "Every Christmas, I wrote letters to Santa, asking for a family, a home. Year after year, these letters went unanswered. So when I read Lucas's letter," he looked at the boy, a sad smile on his lips, "when I read your selfless wish for a job for your mother, something inside me both broke and healed." Lucas, tears in his eyes, asked timidly, "You never had a real Christmas, Mr. Dubois?" Mark shook his head. "Not like the ones you know, Lucas. But your letter, it reminded me of the magic and hope Christmas should represent." Sophie, visibly moved, encouraged Mark to continue. "I wanted to help, desperately. But years of distrust and isolation made me hesitate to simply offer direct help. I feared you would refuse out of pride, or see me as just a wealthy man trying to buy a good deed." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading for understanding. "So I created the role of the recruiter. I wanted to give Sophie a real chance, based on her own merits, not charity. I wanted her to see her own worth as I saw it." Sophie's voice was choked with emotion. "But why keep the charade so long? Why not tell me the truth once I started working?" Mark lowered his eyes, ashamed. "At first, it was fear of ruining what we had built. But over time, I realized I was growing attached to both of you in a way I never expected. You became the family I never had, and I was afraid that if the truth came out, I'd lose you." Silence followed, heavy with unspoken emotions. Lucas broke it first. "So, you wanted to be part of our family?" he asked, voice a mix of confusion and hope. Mark looked at the boy, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I think so, Lucas. Even if I didn't know it at the start." Sophie, who had remained silent, processing everything, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "Mark, I understand your motivations now, and I appreciate your honesty, but you have to understand how your actions affected us." Mark nodded, guilt clear on his face. "I know, Sophie. And if I could go back—" "But we can't go back," Sophie interrupted gently. "What we can do is move forward. With honesty, this time." Lucas, looking between his mother and Mark, asked hesitantly, "Does that mean we can still be friends with Mr. Dubois?" Sophie smiled softly at her son. "Maybe, honey. But first, we need to set some conditions." She turned to Mark, expression serious. "If we want to try to build something here, be it a friendship or anything else, it has to be on equal terms. I don't want charity. I don't want special favors. I want to earn my place on my own merit." Mark nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. I never wanted anything else, Sophie. Your talent and dedication are undeniable. All I did was open a door. You earned every inch of your success," Sophie continued. "And what about my job at Novum Finance?" Mark hesitated before replying. "The job is yours by right. You've proven your worth time and again. If you want to keep it, it's yours. But I'll fully understand if you prefer to seek opportunities elsewhere." Sophie reflected for a moment. "I love the work, Mark, and it would be foolish to give up such an opportunity out of pride. But I need to know I'll be treated like any other employee. No favoritism, no special treatment. You have my word, Mark promised solemnly. Lucas, who had listened intently, asked, "What about us? Can we still see Mr. Dubois outside of work?" Sophie looked at her son, then at Mark, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I think we can try, Lucas. But let's take things slowly, okay? Building trust takes time." Mark smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. "That's more than I could have asked for." "Thank you, Sophie. Lucas, for giving me this chance." Sophie reached out and took Mark's hand in a gesture of reconciliation. "Thank you for your honesty, Mark, and for caring about us, even if in a somewhat clumsy way." Lucas, seeing the gesture, leaped off the couch and hugged Mark impulsively. "Thanks for answering my Christmas letter, Mr. Dubois. Even if you're not really Santa Claus." Mark, surprised and touched by the hug, gently returned it. "Oh, Lucas, don't you see? Your letter did more for me than I could ever do for you. It reminded me of what it's like to have faith, to have hope." Sophie, watching the scene, felt something shift inside her. The anger and mistrust began to melt away, replaced by a deeper understanding, and perhaps the start of something new and precious. "So," she said, a smile playing on her lips, "what do we do now?" Mark, still hugging Lucas, replied with a twinkle in his eyes, "How about we start over? Hello, I'm Mark Dubois." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Sophie laughed, the first genuine laugh in days. "Hello, Mark. I'm Sophie Moreau, and this is my son, Lucas. Welcome to our life." And so, in that sunny morning, in a small apartment filled with renewed hope, 3 wounded souls began to heal each other. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There was trust to rebuild, wounds to mend, and a new kind of relationship to explore. But with each shared smile, each story told, and each promise of honesty, they took a step toward a brighter future. A future where family wasn't defined by blood alone, but by choice, understanding, and unconditional love. As the day went on, the 3 remained together, talking, laughing, and sometimes crying. It was the start of a new journey, a journey of healing, forgiveness, and above all, love in its many unexpected forms. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of Christmas smiled, knowing that sometimes true miracles come not as wrapped presents, but as human connections that transcend all barriers. The aroma of cinnamon and apples filled the air, mixing with the comforting smell of fresh pine. It was Christmas Eve again, but this time, Sophie's apartment was far from quiet or melancholic. Laughter echoed through the living room, where Sophie, Lucas, and Mark decorated a lush Christmas tree, much larger than last year's. Lucas Mars, now 11, balanced precariously on a stool, trying to place the star on top. "Careful, honey," Sophie warned, but her tone was light, her eyes shining with joy. Mark, standing beside her, chuckled softly. "Let him try, Sophie. If he falls out, we'll catch him." Sophie looked at Mark, gratitude in her smile. "Yes, I believe we will." The year since that fateful night had been one of growth, forgiveness, and new beginnings for all of them. Sophie flourished in her role at Novum Finance. Under Mark's discreet guidance, she led an initiative to help small businesses recover after tough economic times. Her work not only solidified the company's socially responsible reputation, but also brought her a sense of purpose and fulfillment she'd never experienced before. "I did it!" Lucas cried triumphantly, finally placing the star atop the tree. Sophie and Mark applauded, pride shining on their faces. Lucas climbed down, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "It's perfect, champ," Mark praised, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. The relationship between Mark and Lucas had deepened over the year. Mark, never having had a family of his own, embraced the role of a father figure with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, himself included. He attended Lucas's soccer games, helped with homework, and shared late-night talks about the wonders of the universe. Sophie watched their interaction with gratitude and admiration. At first, she had been cautious, afraid Lucas would become too attached only to be hurt, but Mark proved day after day that his commitment to them was genuine and lasting. "How about hot chocolate?" Sophie suggested, heading to the kitchen. "I'll help," Lucas offered eagerly, following his mother. Mark watched them go, a feeling of contentment filling him. He walked to the window, gazing at the illuminated city outside. A year ago, he was a lonely man in an empty penthouse. Now here he was, part of a family, in a home filled with love and laughter. In the kitchen, Sophie and Lucas worked in harmony, preparing hot chocolate. Sophie couldn't help noticing how much her son had matured in the past year. The experience of almost losing him that frightening night had taught them both valuable lessons about communication and trust. "Mum," Lucas said suddenly, his voice serious, "do you think Santa Claus will come this year?" Sophie smiled, understanding the real question behind his words. "Well, I think Santa comes in many ways, sweetheart. Sometimes he brings gifts, other times he brings special people into our lives." Lucas nodded, thoughtful. "Like Mark." "Yes, like Mark," Sophie agreed softly. When they returned to the living room with steaming mugs, they found Mark sitting on the sofa, a distant look in his eyes. "A penny for your thoughts," Sophie teased, handing him a mug. Mark smiled, accepting the drink. "I was just reflecting on how much our lives have changed in a year. How a simple act of kindness can spark something so profound and transformative." Lucas snuggled between them on the sofa. "You mean my letter to Santa Claus?" "Exactly," Mark confirmed. "Your letter, Lucas, reminded me of the power of faith and hope. It made me want to be a better person, to make a difference." Sophie placed her hand over Mark's, a gesture that had become natural over the months. "And you have, Mark, for us and for so many others through your work at Novum." Mark intertwined his fingers with hers, grateful for this connection. "You two changed my life as much as I changed yours. You gave me purpose, a family." Lucas, absorbing their conversation, had a sudden idea. "What if we write letters of gratitude to each other, like the letter I wrote to Santa?" Sophie and Mark exchanged surprised looks, then smiled. "That's a wonderful idea, Lucas," Sophie praised. And so the three spent the next hour writing heartfelt letters to one another, the sound of pens scratching paper mixed with the occasional emotional sniffle. When they finished, they sat in a circle to read their letters aloud. Lucas went first. "Dear Mum and Mark, thank you for showing me that Christmas miracles really happen. Mum, you are the strongest and bravest person I know. Mark, thank you for making my mom smile again and for being the best almost dad anyone could ask for. I love you both." There were no dry eyes in the room when he finished. Sophie read next, her voice trembling with emotion. "Lucas, my beloved son, you are my light and inspiration. Your kindness and courage make me want to be better every day. Mark, you came into our lives in an unexpected way, but now I can't imagine our lives without you. Thank you for your patience, your love, and for showing us that family goes beyond blood." Finally, Mark, barely controlling his emotion, read his letter. "Sophie and Lucas, you taught me the true meaning of family and unconditional love. Lucas Higa, your Christmas letter not only brought hope to your mother, but also saved a lonely man from an empty life. Sophie, your strength, integrity, and love are a daily inspiration. Thank you for giving me a chance, for allowing me to be part of your lives. You are the greatest gift I could have asked for." When Mark finished, the three found themselves in a group hug, tears of joy and gratitude flowing freely. "I think we've found our new Christmas tradition," Sophie said softly, still holding the two most important people in her life. Mark nodded, feeling truly at home for the first time in his life. "A perfect tradition for our not-so-traditional family." Lucas, nestled between them, whispered, "Merry Christmas, family." And so, as the night wore on and Christmas Eve turned into Christmas morning, the three remained together, sharing stories, laughing, and planning the future. A future bright, filled with love, understanding, and the certainty that sometimes the greatest miracles come in the most unexpected ways. Outside, snow began to fall gently, covering the city with a white, pure blanket. It was as if the universe itself celebrated this new beginning for an unlikely family, united by the power of a simple Christmas letter and a boy's unwavering hope. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of Christmas smiled, knowing its work was done. For in the end, the greatest miracle of all is the love we find in each other, and the family we create along the way.